Hello and welcome to the first chapter of the Duel Links Archives. Today we are going to talk about the Tier 0 decks in Duel Links history, what they were, how they functioned, and how they fell from their throne. But before, we need to talk about a few things. First off, in Duel Links, there are two ways to play the game in PvP, either through the ladder or by playing community tournaments. And for this type of video, we will mostly talk about tournament play. Second, the concept of Tier 0. Generally, in a card game, a deck is considered being Tier 0 when its representation in events surpasses the 60% mark. That is, the general definition of a Tier 0. But since Tier 0 is a fan-made term and in no case an official term, it is subject to interpretation. Some decks are sometimes considered Tier 0 because they can feel extremely oppressive to play against, yet never actually reaching the 60% representation mark. That is the case for a few decks in Duel Links, such as Dark Lords or Invoked, but we will see about these decks in a dedicated video. For now, let's focus about the decks that, during their time in Duel Links, have reached a Tier 0 status. As of writing this video, Duel Links has had 6 Tier 0 decks throughout its history: Cyber Angels, For Hires, 6 Samurais, Onomats, Salamangreats, and Tachyon Dragon, and together we will see, by chronological order, which decks were the few lucky to have reached this fabled status. Before starting, however, because I will be talking about 6 different decks, I won't really have time to go in depth for each and every one of these decks. This video is more of an introduction to Tier 0 history in Duel Links. Each of these decks deserved an entire video on its own, so let me know which one you would like me to do first. Now, enough with introduction, let's dive right in. Number 1. Cyber Angel. The first deck to have ever been classified as Tier 0 in Duel Links is Cyber Angels. In September 2017, Duel Links added the GX world. With this world, a few of the anime main characters were released, including Alexis Rods. With her came the Cyber Angels, a light fairy archetype centered around ritual summoning. The deck took the meta by storm instantly, being an incredibly aggressive deck, punishing decks that were not able to set up more than one monster, which, at the time, was pretty much every deck in the game. The deck had everything: consistency, protection for going first, and explosive plays for going second. Their main boss monster was Cyber Angel the Kini, a fairy ritual monster, which on summon forces your opponent to send a monster they control to the graveyard. The best form of removal, as it doesn't affect the monster, it affects the player. The deck had little to no counterplay at this time in history, as back row was not so present back then. The only things that we had back then to stop an OTK were Enemy Controller, Suicune, and Windstorm of Aqua. And out of these cards, only Enemy Controller could partially prevent your opponent from executing their full combo if you use the effect of taking control of an opponent's monster until the end phase. The deck was quickly nerfed in the ban list of November 2017, where Machine Angel Ritual was limited to 1, hitting the consistency of the deck as well as its ability to protect itself going first. However, the main problem was still there, as the deck could still search Machine Angel Ritual thanks to cards like Cyber Petite Angel or Sonic Bird, and still had access to 3 Dakini, which meant that the turn 2 of the deck was still the explosive OTK it was before the ban list. In January 2018 though, the ban list which brought a second wave of hits to the deck was implemented. Dakini was put on the semi-limited list alongside Machine Angel Ritual, which meant you could only play 2 of those cards combined. It, alongside the uprising of some of the decks, was enough to slowly power creep the deck out of the meta. The final nail was put in the coffin in the 27th of June 2018 ban list, where the semi-limited Cyber Petite Angel as well. Ever since that day, despite the unhits and waves of support, Cyber Angels were never able to come back to their former glory. Number 2. For Hire. Before starting this segment, I want to briefly shout out someone. This someone is Mechlor, a fellow Duel Links tuber, which released a video about For Hires being Tier 0. So if you want to see a more detailed version of what I'm going to say here, with more context on the meta at that time, the combos of the deck and such, do not hesitate to check his video. Link will be in the description below. The first wave of For Hire cards was released in the box Clash of Wings, released on the 19th of June 2018. And if you remember the previous segment, you probably realized that this deck was released just before the ban list which shook the previous format. It is important in this context to explain that For Hire were released in an already weakened meta, where all the previous top decks lost access to the best card in the game, being Enemy Controller. Clash of Wings brought pretty much everything the deck needed to be Tier 0. It had consistency in the form of Beat Bladesman For Hire, which searches your other For Hire monsters, Destruction in the form of Dampa, Marksman For Hire, and Recon, Scout For Hire, which could respectively destroy face-up and face-down cards, Semi-Lockdown in the form of Dinah, Hero For Hire, which could lock you out of attacking if your opponent had 2 on the field at the same time, and finally Disruption in the form of Wheeze, Sage For Hire, which could negate spell and trap cards. Much like Cyber Angel, the deck took the meta by storm, being almost impossible to stop going second, having access to cards such as Hatronate to clear the back row before OTKing you. And although the deck preferred going second. It could very well perform going first, as you had various ways to protect yourself, and even to interact with your opponent thanks to the card Mayhem for Hire, which allows you to quick play Monster Reborn for Hire. This card in combination with Dampa could represent an interruption during your opponent's turn. However, on the ban list of August 2018, the first hits to the deck came out. Dyna was limited to 1, removing the option to lock your opponent out of attacking. Dampa also got limited to 2, which meant both a consistency hit, but mostly a way to remove enemy controller from the deck. This, plus the fact that people learned to play around the strong points of the deck, was enough to push it out of tier 0 territory. But these hits were quite minor, as the deck still had a lot going for it. Power cards such as B and Wiz were still unlimited, and most importantly, the deck still had access to Hatronade. This meant the deck was in a similar spot to Cyber Angel after their first time on the ban list, where yes, their consistency was slightly reduced, but their turn 2 was still extremely explosive, leading to OTKs just like the deck always would. This would last until almost November of 2018. On the 30th of October 2018, Konami released a ban list severely hitting for hire, by having Wiz, Dyna, and Hatronade limited to 2. This ban list destroyed the deck as they lost a lot of cards in the process, leaving the deck as a shadow of what it once was, and completely pushing it out of the tier lists. And much like Cyber Angels, despite unhits and new waves of supports, the deck never returned to glory past 2018. Number 3. Six Samurai. The next tier 0 deck would come a few months later, in April 2019, with the release of the Warriors Unite box. This box brought support to Six Samurai, which already had a few cards in the game before, but never saw any success whatsoever. This box gave the deck a lot of cards to play around with. Six Samurai United to draw, Legendary Secret of the Six Samurai and Legendary Six Samurai Kizan to flood the field, Secret Six Samurai Fuma to access synchro plays, but most importantly, 3 forms of disruption. The first was Legendary Samurai Shien, which works as a spell and trap negate with absolutely 0 costs, which was a first in the game. The second was Six Style Dual Wield, which is a double bounce card so long as the only monster you control is a face-up attack Six Samurai monster. And finally, Legendary Six Samurai Enishi, that would bounce an opponent's monster to the hand at quick speed if you controlled another Six Samurai monster. During the first era of the deck, people would just rely on Shien in attack position and a dual wield set face down. This was near impossible to deal with, as Shien would already deal with one of your spells, and most of the combos that could deal with Shien otherwise would require 2 cards to be on the field at the same time, opening you to a dual wield. To deal with that, people were starting to experiment very obscure decks, such as stall decks running cards like Cypher Soldier or Karakuri Ninja Sazank, which were able to deal with Shien by themselves. The main drawback with that is, since we don't have main phase 2 in Duel Links, you would only be left with 1 card on the field during your opponent's turn, making you very vulnerable to OTK. After this wave of anti-Six Sam decks and techs, Six Samurai players started to prioritize Shien plus Enishi end board over Shien plus dual wield end board. This board could deal with 1 spell during your opponent's turn as well as 1 monster. The only thing that could break this board efficiently was a Lava Golem that you could summon on your opponent's field by tributing the 2 Six Samurais on their field. But even then, since Lava Golem would prevent you from normal summoning, that means you would essentially lose a turn to remove your opponent's board, making you vulnerable to their next turn. With the Lava Golem trend going up, Six Samurai players started taking cards like Gigantic Castle in their extra deck to not lose to the burn effect of Lava Golem. This deck was the most powerful tier 0 ever by far. Cyber Angels and For Hires could go first, but their true power was their explosiveness going second. Six Samurai excelled at going first, building extremely oppressive boards and pretty much finding ways to circumvent every counter players trying to find against this deck. Eventually though, like it happens to every deck that performs, the ban list came to visit Six Samurai in May 2019. The first hit to the deck was a very minor one, as only Shien Dojo got limited to 2. This was made to remove the limit 2 cards from Six Samurai decks more than to actually reduce the consistency of the deck. This, however, alongside the uprising of Neos decks, was enough to reduce the power level of the deck, and it was not considered tier 0 anymore. The deck remained one of the best decks in the format until August 2019, when 2 things happened. On the 27th, another ban list came to hinder this deck even more by semi-limiting Enishi, drastically reducing the consistency of the deck, and on the 31st, Dark Lords received support from the latest main box, giving us what would become the most powerful deck this game has ever known, pretty much power creeping Six Samurai out of the competitive scene after a few weeks, but again, that will be the subject of another video. After October 2019, the deck never came back to glory. Number 4. Onomats. This is a weird one, and in a lot of ways. First off, because it was probably the weakest tier 0 ever, and the one that was deemed tier 0 the shortest time. Second off, it was the first time a deck was tier 0 because of a specific skill, and not only because of the cards. Third off, since the release of the Zexal world, the deck has received small waves of support in various main box and mini box as well as structure deck, which also made it the first deck to not be considered tier 0 almost instantly after release. Fourth off, it was the only deck so far that came back to the tier lists after being out of it for a while. The deck started as a niche rank 4 OTK strategy thanks to cards like Gagaga Samurai, but was not very effective. Its main cards were Gagaga Coat, Gagaga Sister and Utopic Onomatopoeia, which all came up with the release of the Zexal world. It received some support here and there in January 2021, with cards like Go 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 Glove and Gagaga Head, giving them more swarm plays and recovery respectively. The deck also had access to a crazy skill, Onomatoplay, which made it pretty much impossible to break, fixing your hand however you want, by allowing you to swap 2 monsters of any of the 4 categories of monster the Onomats refer to. The deck got small changes in May of 2021, having Sister limited to 2 to remove the use of Trinade, and a few days later, their skill got changed to only being able to swap 1 monster at a time, but instead being twice per duel. Overall, this didn't change much for the deck, as the players opted to run 1 copy of Hey Trinade and 1 copy of Gagaga Sister that they could search with their skill anyway. The deck alternated between tier 3 and tier 2 for a few weeks, then on the 29th of June of 2021, Konami released the box Darkness Gimmick. In this box came the card Insector Exabeetle, a generic rank 6 Insect Xyz monster. This card gives access to the card Digital Bug Rhinocebus to any deck capable of doing rank 6 Xyz monsters, as Rhino has the ability to be summoned by ranking itself up on top of a rank 5 or 6 Insect Xyz monster. Rhinocebus is an amazing card capable of destroying an opponent's monster at quick play speed without targeting, and a lot of decks just couldn't deal with that threat. This immediately catapulted Onomats to best deck of the format status, but not tier 0 yet. It was only after a few weeks that the community agreed to consider it a tier 0 deck, only for it to be demoted to tier 1 status again after only 1 format. The deck saw 2 hits on the August 2021 ban list, with both Gagaga Head and Rhino going to 2, making the deck much less consistent, as they would have to remove either Gagaga Head or Gagaga Sister to play a copy of Rhino. Players usually opted to run Head for the follow-up. The deck kept going strong until October 2021, where the skill change list made the Onomatoplay skill very bad, only allowing the effect to be used turn 3 and onward, as well as putting heavy restriction on the extra deck building. After that skill list change, the deck was completely dead and players dropped it completely. That was until 2023, where the deck was used as an engine to make Beatrice, allowing the deck to play the Orcust package, but yet another ban list cut off this option by limiting Gagaga Revenge to 1, which meant you could not play it anymore with any of the Limit 1 Orcust cards, and nowadays Onomats isn't really played anymore. Number 5. Salamangreats. Just like Onomats, this deck came along the release of a new world. This time it was Reigns in 2022. The deck came in on the context of a nerfed meta, as the deck that was dominant at the time, Rose Dragon, saw both a skill nerf as well as a limitation of its best card. But this time, however, it wasn't a yellow skill button that made the deck tier 0, it was simply the cards. Salamangreat was one of the most consistent decks ever, having access to Signet Mining, Lady Debug and Salamangreat Circle on release. It even had some of the most powerful playmaker cards of the deck, such as Sunlight Wolf, Gazelle, Jack Jaguar and most importantly, Roar. This deck could consistently set up Salamangreat Roar turn 1 to have an Omni-Negate active whenever needed, as well as protection for a set field thanks to Duel Links in the graveyard. And should you be able to get through set board, the deck had incredible recursion thanks again to cards like Jack Jaguar and Sunlight Wolf. And not only that, the deck was able to OTK pretty consistently, thanks to its ability to swarm the board with monsters, and having access to link monsters enabling OTKs, such as Hitleo and Ningirsu. And that's pretty much it. Unlike the previous decks in this list, Salamangreat didn't have the most flashy plays, the most incredible boss monster, or even some board nuke that could turn the tide of a duel. Just the access to a recyclable Omni-Negate and really impressive consistency. That, along the fact that a ban list hit the best decks of the previous format, was enough to grant Salamangreat a well-deserved tier 0. However, nothing lasts, and like every deck that is too strong, Salamangreats were hit on the ban list. On the 8th of December 2022, Konami announced a ban list that would end the reign of Salamangreats. Circle was limited to 3 and Lady Debug was limited to 2, reducing both the consistency and possibility of running cards of the limited 2 and 3 lists, but the biggest hits happened on the limited 1 list. Both Gazelle and Roar got limited to 1. This absolutely killed Salamangreat's ability to consistently set up an Omni Negate. Although this didn't kill Salamangreat at all, the deck just lost its ability to set up oppressive boards going first, but was still as good when it came to swarming the field, making its turn 2 barely weaker. The deck was still played after the ban list, but without Roar. And with that change, the deck lost its tier 0 status forever. It received other hits on the ban list later, such as Duel Links being limited to 2 to cut the deck's access to Lady Debug, reducing its consistency even more. Today, the deck only kept Gazelle and Roar at 1 and Circle at 3, while all the other hits were undone. The deck continues to be playable and keeps seeing play from time to time, but it's far from its former glory. And finally, number 6. Tachyon Dragon. Last but not least, the final tier 0 deck in the history of Duel Links, as of this video's release, is Tachyon Dragon. Now, if you know the card Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon, you might be wondering how can a deck centered around this big useless beatstick be tier 0? Well, just like Onomats, the deck was released with an incredible skill. In January 2024, we were given the box Tachyon of Galaxy, as well as the character Mizar, which came with the perfect skill for this deck. Tachyon Dragon Domination allowed you to reveal a level 8 monster to add a level 4 or 8 Light Dragon monster from your deck to your hand, in addition to setting a level 8 monster from your hand to your field. That monster could then be flipped face up on the same turn. In addition to giving you consistent access to the deck's best playmaker in Nebula Dragon, the monster on the field was an additional material as well as a card that could facilitate other cards such as Parasect the Interstellar Dragon that can be normal summoned without tribute if you control another level 8 monster. But the best part of the skill was the second effect. You would be able to return any monster on your field to your hand to add either a Tachyon Transmigration or a rank up Magic Barrier Force to your hand. Tachyon Transmigration is a counter trap that can be activated if you control a Galaxy Eyes monster. This card is an Omni Negate that negates all the opponent's card activated before it in the chain. And if you control Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon, you can activate this card from your hand. That means that you didn't even need to set the card for it to be active, making it immune to common back removal such as Mystical Space Typhoon or Cosmic Cyclone. And both of these effects were twice per duel, meaning that even if you managed to clear the turn 1 board of this deck, which was very hard to do, they could just rebuild everything thanks to the free advantage that the skill provides. The deck could consistently end on the board of Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon backed up with the counter trap and the White Dragon Knight Felgran, which was a monster negate. And even going second, the deck had little to no choke points, as you were able to search for your counter trap before committing to your Xyz plays. And the deck being in rank 8 spam strategy meant it had access to the Galaxy Eyes Cypher package, known for its ability to clean up the board. When you look at it, Tachyon is a strategy that shouldn't work, it should never have worked, but the stars aligned around it to make it work, and it worked so well that it was an undisputed, extremely oppressive tier 0 deck. But by now, you know the drill, decks come and decks go, and Tachyon is no exception to this rule. On the ban list of March 2024, Tachyon Transmigration got limited alongside Coach King Giant Trainer, meaning the deck lost access to both it and Felgrand, making their turn 1 much more fair. Galactic Spiral Dragon also got limited to 3, cutting the deck's access to powerful generic back row. But the deck wasn't really hit that hard. What really killed the deck was the skill rebalancing that came a few days after. Tachyon Dragon Domination was changed in various ways. First off, the deck building restriction got changed into special summoning restriction, only allowing the deck to special summon dragons. This cut the deck's access to Ice Dragon's Prison, one of the best back row cards in the game. The second change was that you did not get to set a monster from your hand after activating your skill searching for a dragon monster, while also being limited to activating this effect once per duel only. The third and final hit was that you needed to control Tachyon Dragon to activate the effect of returning a monster to your hand to get Tachyon Transmigration, as well as needing to return specifically a dragon monster to your hand. And finally, Tachyon Transmigration would be set to your field instead of being added to your hand. This meant that the card would be much more susceptible to back row hate. This nerf basically answered all the complaints that the player base had about the deck, in addition to making the deck much less oppressive, with much clearer choke points, and made the deck lose its tier status. However, since this deck is quite recent, as of writing this video, we don't know what will happen with this deck in the near future, although it is most likely not going to do anything after the massacre of Tachyon Dragon domination. That's it for this chapter of the Duel Links Archives. If you liked this video and want to see more of this kind of retrospection, please let me know in the comments what deck, cards or subject you want me to talk about. In the meantime, have a good rest of your day and see you another day for another chapter.